We reviewed our response to those tariffs, our core strategy to fight, to protect, and to build.
And I want to thank you, Canada, for sending those firefighters, many of them from Alberta, to help us battle those blazes. Sadly, I remember one of them asking me, coming back after he had his meal and asking me, do we have to worry about Canada becoming the 51st state? And I said, no, you don't have to worry about that crazy idea, that demeaning idea.
The United States and Canada share the longest undefended border in the world, stretching over 5,500 miles. These two nations are intertwined economically, culturally, and historically, yet their border has remained largely unchanged for centuries. However, what if this permanence isn't as fixed as it appears? What if certain U.S. states, frustrated with federal politics in Washington, D.C., are drawn to Canada's stability, consider breaking away to join their northern neighbor? While it may sound far-fetched, this idea isn't entirely implausible. Some states already maintain deep ties with Canada economically, culturally, and even politically that could make such a shift conceivable under the right circumstances. Let's explore 10 U.S. states that might hypothetically consider aligning with Canada, ranked from least to most surprising. Number 10. Vermont, the Maple Vermont Republic. Vermont, with its rolling hills, maple syrup, and progressive ethos, feels more Canadian than American in many ways. This small New England state has a history of independence, having existed as a Vermont Republic from 1777 to 1791 before joining the U.S. Today, Vermont's politics lean heavily progressive, mirroring Canada's social policies more closely than those of many U.S. states. The state's economy is linked to Quebec through trade, particularly in agriculture and tourism, and its residents share a passion for social programs and environmental stewardship. A movement called the Second Vermont Republic has advocated for secession for years, arguing that Vermont would thrive as an independent entity or in alignment with Canada. With strong economic ties to Quebec, over $500 million in annual trade, and a cultural affinity for Canada's decentralized governance, Vermont could theoretically see itself fitting comfortably north of the border. If political or economic turmoil were to grip the U.S., could Vermont become the first state to secede in centuries? The signs, while subtle, are already present. Number 9. Maine, powered by Canada. Maine's rugged coastline, fishing villages, and French-speaking communities give it a distinctly Canadian vibe. Economically, Maine is heavily reliant on Canada, importing a substantial portion of its electricity from Quebec and participating in over $3 billion of cross-border trade annually. Culturally, Maine shares more with New Brunswick than with distant U.S. states like Texas. Its progressive policies often align with those of Canada, and its history of separating from Massachusetts in 1820 demonstrates a precedent for redefining its boundaries. Maine's dependence on Canadian energy and trade renders it vulnerable to disruptions in U.S.-Canada relations. If a crisis were to strike the U.S., Maine's practical reliance on Canada could lead residents to question their allegiance. The state's small, close-knit communities and passion for the outdoors further blur the distinctions between Maine and its northern neighbor. Number 8. New Hampshire, live free or join Canada. New Hampshire's motto, live free or die, encapsulates its fiercely independent spirit. With no income or sales tax, a strong libertarian movement, and resistance to federal oversight, the state operates quite differently from much of the U.S. In 2022, a group of lawmakers proposed a constitutional amendment to explore secession, a bold move that, though unsuccessful, sparked serious debate. New Hampshire's economy is deeply connected to Canada, with over $8 billion in annual trade, and its businesses depend on Canadian partnerships. Culturally, New Hampshire's rural character, passion for winter sports, and outdoor lifestyle closely align with Canada's. The Free State Project, which encourages libertarians to move to New Hampshire, has intensified demands for limited government, demands that could, in extreme cases, lead to leaving the U.S. altogether. If New Hampshire's push for independence ever went beyond resisting federal policies, Canada's decentralized system might seem appealing. Number 7. Minnesota, Canada's twin. Minnesota shares a 550-mile border with Canada, and its largest trading partner is, you guessed it, Canada. In 2023, Minnesota exported over $7 billion in goods across the border, making Canada a vital part of its economy. Beyond economics, Minnesota's culture feels distinctly Canadian, friendly, outdoorsy people, a passion for hockey, and brutally cold winters. Politically, the state's progressive policies align more closely with Canada's than with conservative regions of the U.S. historically. Parts of Minnesota were governed by the British before it became a U.S. state in 1858, and its fur trade was closely linked to Canada. Today, many Minnesotans hold dual citizenship or have family across the border. If the U.S. were to face political or economic collapse, experts suggest Minnesota could be among the first to consider alternatives. With such deep connections, looking north might not be a significant leap. Number 6. North Dakota, Canada's economic satellite. North Dakota may appear to be a quiet corner of the U.S., but its economy is closely intertwined with Canada's. The state exports over $6 billion in goods to Canada each year, more than to any other country. Canada provides much of North Dakota's energy, and local farmers depend on Canadian buyers. Daily life also reflects this connection. Residents frequently cross the border for healthcare, shopping, and work, while Canadian license plates are common sight. Politically, North Dakota's small government, pro-business mindset aligns more with Canada's western provinces, such as Alberta, than with Washington, D.C. historically. There were discussions about merging North Dakota and Manitoba into a single economic zone. If a crisis strained U.S. unity, North Dakota's dependence on Canada could raise questions about its loyalty to a federal system that often overlooks it. Number 5. Montana, the Canadian twin. Montana's rugged, independent spirit makes it feel like a Canadian province in all but name. Sharing a 545-mile border with Alberta, Saskatchewan, and British Columbia, Montana exported over $700 million in goods to Canada in 2023. Culturally, Montanans and Canadians share a passion for ranching, hunting, and enduring harsh winters. Historically, Montana's fur trade was dominated by Canadian companies, and many residents today hold dual citizenship or have family ties across the border. Montana's strong anti-federal sentiment fosters distrust of Washington, D.C. If political or economic instability were to strike the U.S., some Montanans might view Canada's system as a better fit for their values and economy. The notion that Alberta and Montana are practically the same place, minus Canada's universal health care, may not be so far from the truth. Number 4. Washington, Canada's economic partner. Washington State's connection to Canada is undeniable. Canada is its top trading partner, with over $20 billion in goods exchanged in 2023. Seattle's port depends on Canadian shipping routes, and the state imports a substantial amount of hydroelectric power from British Columbia. Politically, Washington's progressive policies on health care, environmental protection, and social services align more closely with Canada's than with most U.S. states. Culturally, the overlap is striking. From Vancouver to Seattle, residents embrace an outdoor lifestyle and a tech-driven economy. Proposals for high-speed rail between the cities and deeper economic integration suggest a future where the border feels less significant. If the U.S. experiences a major political divide, Washington might find itself drawn north instead of east. Number 3. Oregon, a Canadian mindset. Oregon's progressive politics, environmental focus, and labor rights align more closely with British Columbia than with much of the U.S. The state trades more than $4 billion in goods with Canada annually, and its cultural connections to Vancouver are strong. Portland and Vancouver embrace an outdoor lifestyle and progressive ethos that feel disconnected from states like Texas or Florida. While the Greater Idaho movement seeks to realign rural Oregon with Idaho, some argue that Western Oregon might fit better with Canada. If federal tensions intensified, Oregonians could question whether their values are better represented north of the border. In a crisis, Oregon could be among the first to reassess its place in the U.S. Number 2. Alaska, the isolated frontier. Alaska's geographic isolation distinguishes it from the U.S. mainland, as it can only be reached by traveling through Canada. Its economy relies on Canada for billions in trade, especially in oil, seafood, and various resources. Canadian companies have investments in Alaska's industries, and the state's military bases work closely with Canada through NORAD. Historically, Alaska was Russian territory before its purchase by the U.S. in 1867, demonstrating that it hasn't always been American. If political upheaval struck the U.S., Alaska's practical and economic ties to Canada could make independence or alignment with Canada a tempting option. When a state already functions as a separate nation, breaking away doesn't seem so far-fetched. Number 1. Michigan, Canada's industrial partner. Michigan leads the nation with its impressive $80 billion in annual trade with Canada, surpassing all other U.S. states. The Detroit-Windsor corridor serves as a crucial industrial hub, with thousands of trucks crossing daily. Michigan's automotive industry depends on Canadian labor and components, and the state shares essential infrastructure, bridges, tunnels, power grids, with Canada. Historically, following the Toledo War in the 1830s, some Michiganders contemplated joining Canada. Today, the economic and cultural ties remain strong. If Michigan's economy were to collapse without Canada, or if the U.S. were to fracture politically, the state might reconsider its allegiance. In many ways, Michigan already functions like a Canadian province. Could it one day make that official? Conclusion. At first glance, the idea of U.S. states joining Canada seems like speculative fiction, yet the connections are undeniable. Economies reliant on Canadian trade, cultural similarities, and political alignments that often clash with Washington's priorities. History demonstrates that borders can shift, nations evolve, and what seems impossible today could become reality tomorrow. Should the U.S. confront a major crisis, whether political, economic, or social, these states might reconsider their options. So, what do you think? Could any of these states realistically leave the U.S. or Canada, or is the border too entrenched a challenge? The connections are stronger than most realize, and in an uncertain world, anything is possible.